The summer heat had baked Atlanta for 11 consecutive days, turning the city into a shimmering mirage of concrete and steel. At 3:47 in the morning, the temperature still hovered at 89 degrees, the air thick and motionless, carrying the faint smell of overheated asphalt and wilting magnolias. Lieutenant Sarah Collins had her window down as she navigated the unmarked cruiser through the empty streets of Buckhead, Max alert in the back seat, his ears rotating like satellite dishes picking up signals she couldn't hear. The call had come in 12 minutes ago. Structure fire at the Harrington estate on West Paces Ferry Road. Possible arson. Possible casualties. The dispatcher's voice had carried that particular tension that told Sarah this wasn't a routine call. Garrison Harrington was one of Atlanta's most influential men, a private equity titan whose name appeared on hospital wings, university buildings, and political campaign finance reports across the state. His mansion burning in the middle of the night would make national news by sunrise. Sarah turned onto West Paces Ferry, and the orange glow became visible through the canopy of ancient oaks that lined the prestigious street. She accelerated, her jaw tightening as the scene came into full view. The Harrington Mansion, a 12,000-square-foot Georgian revival that had graced the covers of architectural magazines, was fully engulfed on its eastern wing. Flames roared from shattered windows, sending columns of spark-filled smoke spiraling into the starless sky. 4 fire engines were already on scene, crews working with desperate efficiency to contain the blaze before it spread to the main structure. She pulled the cruiser onto the manicured lawn, now scarred with tire tracks from emergency vehicles. Max was already on his feet, a low whine escaping his throat. He could sense it too, Sarah knew. Something about this fire was wrong. Fires had their own language, their own behavior patterns. This one was speaking in tongues she didn't recognize. Captain Marcus Webb from the Arson Investigation Unit approached as she stepped out, his face streaked with soot and sweat. His expression told her everything she needed to know before he opened his mouth. Accelerant, he said. Multiple points of origin. This was professional. Sarah released Max from the vehicle, attaching his lead with practiced efficiency. The Belgian Malinois immediately lowered his nose, reading the scene with senses that made human perception seem primitive by comparison. His body tensed, muscles coiling beneath his sleek coat. "Where's Harrington?" Sarah asked. Webb shook his head. "No one's seen him in 3 days. His assistant reported him missing yesterday afternoon. We were supposed to start a formal search in the morning." The timing felt deliberate. Sarah watched the fire crews battle the inferno, water arcing through the superheated air and evaporating before it could do much good. The eastern wing was a loss. The question was whether they could save the rest and whatever evidence remained inside. "Perimeter sweep," Webb said. "We need to know if anyone made it out or if there are bodies we haven't found." Sarah nodded, but her attention was on Max. The dog was straining against his lead, his focus locked on the mansion's western side, away from the main fire. His behavior was unusual. In their 7 years together, she had learned to trust his instincts implicitly. When Max fixated on something, there was always a reason. She let him lead, following his urgent pull across the lawn toward a service entrance, partially obscured by a row of boxwood hedges. The fire hadn't reached this section yet, but smoke poured from cracks around the doorframe, and the heat radiated outward in visible waves that distorted the air. Max stopped at the door, pawing at it, then looking back at Sarah with an intensity that made her heart rate spike. He wanted in. Every protocol, every training manual, every survival instinct screamed at her to keep him back. But she had learned long ago that Max's judgment in the field was often better than her own. She tried the handle, locked. She stepped back, drew her weapon, and fired twice at the lock mechanism. The door swung inward, releasing a belch of superheated air that forced her to shield her face. Max didn't hesitate. He lunged through the opening and vanished into the smoke-filled darkness. "Max!" she shouted. "Max! Heel!" Nothing. No response. No familiar shape emerging from the grey murk. Sarah grabbed a respirator from a nearby fire crew, pressed it to her face, and followed him in. The smoke was disorienting, reducing visibility to less than 5 feet. She moved low, one hand on the wall, calling Max's name between coughs despite the respirator's protection. The heat was building, the fire's hungry roar growing louder somewhere to her left. She had minutes at best before this section became unsurvivable. She found him in what appeared to be a home office. The room was surprisingly intact, the fire's damage limited to smoke infiltration and heat stress. Max stood in the center of the space, his body rigid, his attention fixed on a section of built-in bookshelves along the far wall. He wasn't barking, wasn't pawing, just staring with that laser focus that meant he had found something significant. "Max, come," Sarah commanded. He didn't move. She crossed to him, grabbed his harness, pulled. He resisted with a strength that surprised her, planting his feet and refusing to budge. Then he did something she had never seen him do in all their years together. He turned, locked eyes with her, and deliberately walked toward the bookshelf, looking back to ensure she followed. Sarah followed. The bookshelf appeared ordinary, filled with leather-bound volumes and decorative objects, but Max was pawing at a specific section near the floor, his claws scraping against the wood with increasing urgency. Sarah knelt, running her hands along the surface, feeling for anything unusual. Her fingers found it, a slight depression, barely perceptible, disguised as part of the decorative molding. She pressed it. A click, and a section of the shelf swung outward, revealing a hidden compartment approximately 2 feet deep. Inside, illuminated by the orange glow filtering through the smoke, sat a single item, a metallic briefcase, its surface already warm from the ambient heat. The ceiling groaned above them, a sound that sent ice through Sarah's veins despite the inferno's heat. They were out of time. She grabbed the briefcase, hooked her fingers through Max's harness, and ran. The smoke had thickened to near opacity, and she navigated by memory and instinct, bouncing off walls and furniture until she found the service entrance. They burst through the doorway and into the marginally cooler night air. Sarah gasping, Max panting, both of them covered in soot and ash. Fire crews rushed toward them, hands reaching to help, voices shouting questions she couldn't process. She held up the briefcase, still clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Evidence, she managed between coughs. Hidden compartment. Max found it. Captain Webb appeared, his eyes widening at the sight of the case. "That section of the house collapsed 30 seconds after you came out," he said. "Whatever's in there, someone wanted it destroyed." Sarah looked at Max, who had recovered his composure and sat at her feet, watching the fire with an expression she could only describe as satisfied. He had known, somehow, he had known that briefcase was worth the risk. They established a command post in the Harrington Estates detached garage, far enough from the fire to be safe, but close enough to monitor the ongoing battle against the flames. Sarah placed the briefcase on a workbench, studying it under portable lights while Max lay at her feet, finally allowing himself to rest. The case was custom-made, constructed from what appeared to be aircraft-grade aluminum with a titanium-reinforced frame. The locking mechanism was biometric, requiring a fingerprint scan to open. The heat from the fire had warped the casing slightly, but hadn't compromised its integrity. Whatever was inside had survived. Detective Raymond Torres from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived within the hour, his unmarked sedan sliding into the crowded driveway with practiced precision. Torres was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for unraveling complex fraud schemes that would give most investigators migraines. His presence at a fire scene at 4 a.m. told Sarah that someone in command had already connected dots she hadn't yet seen. "Harrington," Torres said without preamble. "We've been building a case for 8 months." Sarah straightened. What kind of case? Torres glanced around, ensuring no unauthorized ears were within range. Money laundering, scale like you wouldn't believe. We're talking hundreds of millions flowing through shell companies, real estate transactions, political campaigns. He pointed at the briefcase. If that's what I think it is, you might have just saved us years of work. The biometric lock presented a problem. Without Harrington's fingerprint, they would need a court order and a forensic specialist to crack it open, a process that could take days. Days they might not have if the people who set this fire realized their plan had failed. Torres made calls while Sarah stepped outside to check on Max. The dog had recovered fully, his energy returning as the adrenaline of their escape faded. He stood at the edge of the command post's perimeter, nose working the air, cataloguing the chaos of scents that swirled through the smoke-laden atmosphere. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hand along his flank in the way he liked. "You scared me in there," she said quietly. "But you were right. You're always right." Max pressed his head against her shoulder, a gesture of affection and reassurance that transcended the boundaries of species. Their bond had been forged through years of danger, triumph, and loss. She trusted him with her life, and tonight he had proven once again that the trust was earned. The fire was finally coming under control as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The Harrington Mansion's eastern wing was a total loss, reduced to a skeletal framework of charred beams and collapsed walls. The western section had survived largely intact, though smoke and water damage would require extensive remediation. Crime scene technicians were already assembling, waiting for clearance to begin their work. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Captain Webb. "Forensics found something in the debris. East Wing basement. You need to see this." She leashed Max and made her way across the scarred lawn to where Webb stood near a crater that had once been the mansion's foundation. The forensic team had set up lights, illuminating the destruction with harsh white clarity that made every detail painfully visible. Webb led her to the edge of the crater, pointing down into the wreckage. What appeared to be a heavy steel door lay twisted and partially melted, blown off its hinges by the fire or the explosion that had started it. "Panic room," Webb said. "State-of-the-art, fireproof supposedly." The blast originated directly above it. "Someone wanted to make sure whoever was inside didn't get out," Sarah said, "or to destroy whatever was stored inside." Webb handed her a tablet displaying thermal imaging from the fire department's drone. The room was sealed, airtight. "When we finally got it open, we found this." He swiped to a photograph that made Sarah's stomach drop. The interior of the panic room was immaculate, untouched by the flames that had raged above. But it wasn't empty. A man in his 60s lay slumped against the far wall, his tailored suit rumpled, his silver hair disheveled. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing, and his skin had the waxy pallor of death. A small hole in his right temple told the story his silenced lips could not. "Garrison Harrington," Webb confirmed. "Time of death is going to be tricky with the heat, but the ME's preliminary estimate is at least 48 hours before the fire started." Sarah processed the implications. He was killed before the fire. The fire was to cover something else, or to destroy that briefcase you found. Webb's expression darkened. Someone knew it was in there. Knew Harrington had evidence that could hurt them. They killed him, then came back to burn the proof. "But they didn't know about the hidden compartment," Sarah said. "They thought the briefcase was in the panic room with him." Webb nodded. "Your dog just became the most important witness in what might be the biggest corruption case in Atlanta's history." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of interviews, reports, and jurisdictional negotiations. The FBI had taken an interest, their Atlanta field office dispatching agents to coordinate with local authorities. The DA's office sent representatives to ensure proper chain of custody for any evidence recovered, politicians, media outlets, and concerned citizens all descended on the Harrington investigation, each with their own agendas and demands. Sarah and Max were sequestered in a conference room at APD headquarters, ostensibly for their own protection, but more practically to keep them available for the endless stream of questions from investigators, lawyers, and administrators. Max had settled into his usual patient waiting mode, occasionally lifting his head when a new person entered, then returning to his rest when he determined they posed no threat. Detective Torres arrived with news late that afternoon. His face carried the exhausted triumph of a man who had just seen months of work validated. "We got the briefcase open," he said, closing the door behind him. "Took a federal judge and a forensic locksmith, but we're in." Sarah straightened in her chair. "What's inside?" Torres pulled up a chair, his voice dropping despite the room's apparent privacy. "Everything. Harrington was a meticulous record keeper. We're talking financial statements, transaction records, communication logs, account numbers for offshore holdings. He was documenting every illegal deal he ever made. Why would he keep records of his own crimes? Insurance." Torres leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "We think he knew someone was coming for him. The past 6 months he'd been consolidating evidence, creating a comprehensive file of everyone who was involved in his operations. Judges, prosecutors, city councilmen, state legislators, even a few federal officials." Sarah felt the weight of what he was describing, a corruption network that extensive, that well-connected. "How high does it go?" Torres hesitated. "High enough that I'm not comfortable saying names in a room I haven't personally swept for bugs." He met her eyes. "Your dog found the one piece of evidence that can bring down people who've been untouchable for decades. That makes both of you targets." As if on cue, Max lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward the door. A moment later, a knock. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon before she caught herself. The door opened to reveal Captain Patricia Okonkwo, commanding officer of the K-9 unit, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Collins," she said. "My office. Now." Sarah rose, Max immediately at her side. She followed Okonkwo through the labyrinth of headquarters, noting the unusual number of unfamiliar faces in the corridors. Federal agents, she assumed. The building was transforming into a multi-agency operations center. Okonkwo's office was small but immaculate, every surface organized with military precision. She closed the door, engaged the lock, and turned to face Sarah with an intensity that raised immediate alarms. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Okonkwo said. "Understood?" Sarah nodded. 3 hours ago, we intercepted a communication, encrypted, routed through multiple international servers. Someone put a price on your head, and Max's. The words landed like physical blows. Sarah's mind raced through implications, in scenarios, threat assessments, a contract, someone wanted them eliminated. How much? $500,000 for you, 200,000 for the dog. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. "These people don't mess around, Collins. The evidence in that briefcase threatens to expose a network worth billions. A few $100,000 to make you disappear is pocket change. What are my options?" Okonkwo moved behind her desk, pulling up a file on her computer. "Witness protection is on the table. The feds are willing to relocate you, new identity, the works. But it means leaving the force, leaving Atlanta, leaving everything." Sarah looked down at Max, who sat at her feet with unwavering calm. He had faced bullets, explosives, armed suspects, and burning buildings. He had never wavered, never hesitated. She owed him better than running. "What's the alternative?" Okonkwo almost smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask that." She turned the monitor to face Sarah. "We're establishing a task force to dismantle the network Harrington documented. FBI, DOJ, state investigators, and a select group of APD officers we know we can trust. They want you on it, you and Max. Your track record speaks for itself, and frankly, You're already a target. Might as well be a target who's fighting back. Sarah considered the proposition. Joining a task force hunting the same people hunting her. It was dangerous, potentially suicidal. It was also the only choice that felt right. "I'm in," she said. "We're in." The task force established its headquarters in a nondescript office building in Midtown, far from the scrutiny of City Hall and federal courthouses. The team was small by design, each member hand-picked and vetted through background checks that bordered on invasive. Sarah recognized a few faces from joint operations over the years, but most were strangers, federal agents and state investigators whose paths had never crossed with an Atlanta PD K-9 officer. Special Agent Diana Reeves led the federal contingent, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s whose reputation preceded her. She had taken down a cartel operation in Miami, dismantled a human trafficking ring in Houston, and exposed a corruption scandal in the Chicago Police Department. Her presence signaled the seriousness with which Washington was treating the Harrington case. Reeves conducted the first full briefing on day 3. The team assembled in a windowless conference room that smelled of fresh paint and anxiety. Screens displayed organizational charts, financial flowcharts, and surveillance photographs that told a story of systematic corruption spanning decades. Garrison Harrington was a facilitator, Reeves began. He didn't create the network, but he made it profitable. His private equity firm served as a laundry, cleaning dirty money through legitimate investments and funneling it to politicians who protected the operation. She clicked to a new slide, displaying a web of connections that made Sarah's head spin. The nodes represented names she recognized from newspapers, campaign signs, and courthouse directories. Judges who had dismissed cases they should have prosecuted. Prosecutors who had declined to pursue investigations that threatened network members. City officials who had approved permits, contracts, and zoning changes that benefited network-connected businesses. We've identified 37 individuals with direct ties to Harrington's operation, Reeves continued. That number will grow as we dig deeper into the evidence, but here's the challenge. These people have been operating with impunity for so long that they've built in fail-safes, kill switches, ways to make evidence disappear and witnesses stop talking. She turned to Sarah. Which brings us to you, Lieutenant. Your recovery of that briefcase was an unplanned variable. They didn't know Harrington had created a second cache of evidence. They thought destroying the panic room would end the threat. Now they're scrambling, and scrambling people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Sarah asked. The kind we can exploit. Reeves clicked again, displaying a photograph of a man in his 50s, heavyset, with the polished appearance of someone accustomed to expensive suits and deferential treatment. Judge Walter Henning, Superior Court, Fulton County. He's been on Harrington's payroll for 15 years, according to the documents you recovered. 3 days ago, he liquidated his offshore accounts and booked a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. He's running. Torres said from across the table. He's panicking, Reeves corrected, and panicked people talk to other panicked people. We need to intercept those communications before Henning disappears. Sarah studied the photograph, committing the face to memory. What's my role? Reeves smiled, the expression carrying an edge of anticipation. Judge Henning has a routine every Thursday evening. He meets with his attorney at a private club in Buckhead. Very exclusive, very discreet, no phones allowed inside. But he has to walk from his car to the entrance. That's a window of approximately 90 seconds when he's accessible. You want me to approach a sitting judge, Sarah said flatly. That's career suicide. Not approach, observe. Reeves leaned forward. We have reason to believe Henning is carrying physical documents. Old school, because he doesn't trust digital communications anymore. If we can confirm that, we can obtain a warrant for his vehicle, his home, his office. And if he spots me, that's where Max comes in. A K-9 officer walking her dog near a private club isn't suspicious. It's background noise. Henning won't give you a second look. Sarah considered the plan. It was thin, dependent on variables they couldn't control, but it was also their best shot at catching Henning before he disappeared into the international void. The private club occupied a converted mansion on Peachtree Road, its entrance guarded by iron gates and uniformed security that screened every visitor. Sarah had positioned herself across the street, Max on a casual leash, both of them dressed down to blend with the upscale neighborhood's evening foot traffic. She wore wireless earbuds connected to the team's communication channel, her weapon concealed beneath a light jacket that matched the warm evening's dress code. Thursday at 7:23, Judge Henning's Mercedes pulled into the club's circular drive. Sarah watched through peripheral vision as he emerged, a leather portfolio clutched under one arm. He paused, scanning his surroundings with the nervous energy of a man who knew he was being hunted. Max's behavior caught Sarah's attention. The dog had stiffened, his focus locked on Henning, with an intensity that usually signaled a detection. She looked down at him, questioning silently. "He smells something," she murmured into her mic. "Something on Henning or in that portfolio. Can you get closer?" Torres's voice crackled in her ear. "Negative. Security is watching." Henning disappeared inside the club, the heavy doors closing behind him. Sarah maintained her position, walking Max in slow circuits that kept the entrance in view. The evening dragged on, shadows lengthening as the sun dropped below the Atlanta skyline. At 9:41, Henning re-emerged. He was sweating despite the air-conditioned club, his movements jerky with barely contained agitation. The portfolio was still under his arm, but something had changed. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by the hollow-eyed fear of a man who had just received very bad news. "He's spooked," Sarah reported. Something happened in there. Henning's driver opened the Mercedes door, but Henning didn't enter immediately. He stood beside the car, portfolio clutched to his chest, staring at nothing. Then he did something unexpected. He turned, looked directly at Sarah and Max across the street, and their eyes met. Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon. She saw recognition flash across Henning's face, followed by terror. He knew who she was. He knew what she represented. "He's running," she said into her mic, already moving. But Henning didn't run. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a phone he wasn't supposed to have, and made a call. Sarah watched his lips move, his free hand gesturing wildly. Then he threw the phone into the bushes, climbed into the Mercedes, and the car sped away. "I need that phone," Torres said. "Can you retrieve it without being seen?" Sarah assessed the situation. The security guards were focused on the departing Mercedes, momentarily distracted. She crossed the street with Max, his presence providing cover for her approach. A quick gesture sent Max toward the bushes, his nose working the undergrowth until he emerged with the phone clamped gently in his jaws. "Good boy," she whispered, taking the device and slipping it into an evidence bag. Extract complete, heading to rally point. The phone proved to be a goldmine. Henning's panicked call had gone to a number traced to a burner phone, but the metadata revealed something more valuable. A pattern of communication that connected Henning to 5 other individuals in the network. Cross-referencing those numbers with Harrington's documents revealed an inner circle of conspirators who had been coordinating their response to the briefcase's discovery. Reeves assembled the team at midnight. The evidence spread across multiple screens in a visualization that mapped the network's command structure. "They're organizing a purge," she announced. "Every piece of evidence that could corroborate Harrington's documents is being destroyed. Servers wiped, files shredded, witnesses intimidated. We have maybe 48 hours before they succeed." Torres pointed to a cluster of names on the display. "These 5 are the key: Henning District Attorney Marcus Webb, City Councilwoman Patricia Shade, State Senator Thomas Garrett, and this man." He highlighted a face that made Sarah's blood run cold. Deputy Police Chief Robert Langston. Langston. Sarah had worked under his command for 3 years early in her career. He had written her recommendation for the K-9 unit. The betrayal cut deep. Langston controls information flow within APD, Torres continued. He's been suppressing investigations, reassigning officers, losing evidence. Every case that got close to the network, he killed it. Sarah forced her emotions aside, focusing on the operational reality. How do we approach this? Langston has access to everything we're doing. He'll know we're coming. Not everything. Reeves pulled up a new screen. This task force exists off the books. Our funding comes from a discretionary federal account. Our communications run through encrypted channels Langston can't access. But you're right that we need to move fast. The moment he suspects he's under investigation, he'll burn every connection he has. The plan they developed was audacious, requiring simultaneous operations against all 5 targets to prevent any one of them from warning the others. Arrest teams would move at precisely 6 a.m., coordinated across multiple jurisdictions. Warrants had already been prepared, sealed by federal judges outside Georgia to prevent leaks. Sarah's assignment was Langston. Reeves had argued against it, citing the personal connection, but Sarah had insisted. She knew Langston's habits, his security protocols, his vulnerabilities. More importantly, she needed to look him in the eye when the handcuffs clicked shut. The night before the operation, she sat alone in her apartment with Max curled at her feet, reviewing Langston's file on a secure tablet. 30 years on the force. Commendations for bravery. Community outreach awards. A carefully constructed facade that hid decades of corruption. Max lifted his head, sensing her turmoil. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "We trusted him," she said quietly. "We all trusted him." Max pressed against her leg, a warm weight that grounded her to the present moment. Tomorrow they would face the consequences of that misplaced trust. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel the sting of betrayal. Dawn arrived with a mist that softened Atlanta's harsh edges, turning the city into a watercolor of muted grays and greens. Sarah positioned her team 3 blocks from Langston's home in a quiet Druid Hills neighborhood, the houses set far back from tree-lined streets. Max sat beside her in the passenger seat of an unmarked SUV, his body vibrating with contained energy. The radio crackled, all teams in position, executing in 90 seconds. Sarah checked her weapon, her vest, her cuffs, routine preparations that helped channel the adrenaline into focus rather than anxiety. 60 seconds, she opened the SUV door, signaling Max to follow. The team assembled silently, moving toward Langston's property with the practiced coordination of countless training exercises. 30 seconds, they reached the front door. Sarah took point position, Max at her side. Execute. The door surrendered to the battering ram on the second strike. Sarah was through before the debris settled, Max racing ahead to clear the entry hall. Shouts of police, warrant, heads up echoed through the house as the team flowed through rooms with choreographed precision. She found Langston in his study, already dressed in his deputy chief's uniform, apparently preparing for a normal workday. His hand was reaching toward a desk drawer when Max's warning bark froze him in place. "Don't," Sarah said, her weapon trained on his center mass. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Langston's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, calculation, anger, and finally a cold resignation that chilled Sarah more than any of the preceding expressions. "Collins," he said, his voice carrying an almost paternal disappointment. "I should have known it would be you. You never did know when to leave things alone. Hands, now." He raised them slowly, palms out. "You have no idea what you're doing. The network is bigger than anything in that briefcase. Bigger than me, bigger than this city." Sarah moved forward, cuffs ready. "Tell it to your lawyer." The arrest proceeded without further incident. Langston was secured, read his rights, and transported to federal custody. Across the city, the other targets fell in similar fashion. Henning was apprehended at his home, still in pajamas. Councilwoman Shade was taken from her office at City Hall. Senator Garrett surrendered at his attorney's office, apparently tipped off by the commotion. DA Webb attempted to flee through a back entrance and was tackled by FBI agents who had anticipated the move. By noon, the network's leadership was in custody, their assets frozen, their communications intercepted. News vans had descended on every location, reporters breathlessly describing the biggest corruption scandal in Atlanta's history. The mayor held an emergency press conference, expressing shock and outrage that sounded rehearsed. Sarah watched it all from the task force headquarters, exhaustion settling into her bones like lead. Max slept at her feet, finally allowing himself to rest now that the immediate danger had passed. Reeves approached with coffee, offering a cup that Sarah accepted gratefully. "Hell of a week," Reeves said. "You should go home, get some real sleep. Is it over?" Reeves sat down, her own fatigue evident in the dark circles under her eyes. "The arrests are done. The trials will take years. Some of these people have resources to fight extradition, challenge evidence, drag out proceedings until everyone forgets why we started." She took a long drink of coffee. "But the network is broken. That's what matters." Sarah looked at Max, remembering the moment in the burning mansion when he had refused to leave, when his instincts had overridden her commands. If he hadn't found that briefcase, none of this would have happened. The network would still be operating, untouched and untouchable. "He knew," she said. "Somehow he knew it was important." Reeves smiled. "Dogs have better judgment than people sometimes. Present company excluded, of course." The weeks that followed brought a cascade of revelations as forensic accountants and investigators worked through the evidence Harrington had compiled. The network's reach extended far beyond the initial arrests, implicating businessmen, lobbyists, and officials at every level of government. Some cooperated, trading testimony for reduced sentences. Others lawyered up and prepared for legal battles that would consume years of their lives. Sarah was offered a promotion, recognition for her role in bringing down the conspiracy. She declined. The K-9 unit was where she belonged, where she and Max could do the most good. Desks and press conferences weren't their style. The city struggled to rebuild trust in its institutions. New officials were appointed to replace the corrupt ones. Reform initiatives were announced with great fanfare, their effectiveness yet to be determined. The cynical noted that corruption had a way of regenerating, that new networks would eventually rise to replace the old. The optimistic hope that maybe, this time, things would be different. On a cool evening 3 months after the arrests, Sarah took Max for a walk through Piedmont Park. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the paths with gold and crimson. Joggers and dog walkers filled the space with the comfortable energy of a city returning to normal. They stopped at a bench overlooking the lake, watching the water catch the last light of sunset. Max sat beside her, his attention drifting between the ducks on the water and a squirrel chattering in a nearby tree. "You did good," she told him. "You changed everything." Max looked at her, his brown eyes warm with understanding that transcended the species barrier. Then he turned back to the squirrel, issuing a soft woof of frustration at prey he wasn't allowed to chase. Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been a long time since she had laughed. The weight of the past months still pressed on her shoulders, but moments like this made it bearable. Moments of simple joy, shared with her partner. Her phone buzzed. A text from Reeves. "New case. Possible corruption in the Port Authority. Your expertise requested." Sarah read the message twice, then showed it to Max. He tilted his head, ears perking up at the familiar shift in her body language. Ready for another adventure? Max stood, tail wagging, his answer clear. She typed her response. "Send me the details." The corruption they had exposed was just one head of a hydra that regenerated faster than justice could strike. But that was the job. That was the calling she had answered years ago when she first pinned on a badge. As long as there were people willing to abuse power for personal gain, there would be officers like her willing to stand against them. She leashed Max and headed for the parking lot, her mind already shifting to the new case, the new challenges ahead. Atlanta's skyline glittered in the gathering dusk, beautiful and brutal in equal measure, a city of contradictions, a city that needed protecting. Behind her, the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new dangers, new opportunities to make a difference. Tonight she would rest, prepare, and let the bond between human and K-9 recharge for whatever came next. Max walked beside her, his presence a constant reminder that she was never truly alone in this fight. Partners to the end, guardians of a city that often didn't appreciate what they sacrificed. It didn't matter. The work was its own reward. The parking lot was nearly empty when they reached the SUV. Sarah opened the rear door and Max leaped in with practiced ease. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street. Through the rearview mirror, she caught Max's reflection, his noble profile outlined against the passing streetlights. 7 years together, hundreds of cases, countless moments of triumph and terror. Their story was far from over. "New case," she said aloud, "new bad guys to catch." Max's ears perked forward, his attention sharpening at the promise implicit in her words. Sarah smiled and drove into the night. The Port Authority case proved to be another layer of the corruption Harrington had documented. Some of the officials implicated had connections to the original network, suggesting that the rot ran even deeper than initially suspected. Sarah spent weeks working the waterfront, Max by her side, unraveling a smuggling operation that used legitimate shipping containers to move contraband ranging from drugs to weapons to counterfeit goods. The investigation led to arrests, indictments, and the eventual dismantling of another criminal enterprise that had operated for years under the protection of compromised officials. Each success felt like a brick removed from the wall of corruption that surrounded the city, progress measured in inches rather than miles. Life settled into a rhythm of work and recovery, cases and downtime. Sarah rebuilt relationships that had frayed during the intense months of the initial investigation. She visited her mother in Savannah, reconnected with friends from the academy, even started dating again for the first time in years. Normal life, or something approximating it. Max, for his part, seemed to sense the shift in their circumstances. He was more playful during their off hours, less hypervigilant. The constant tension that had defined their existence during the Harrington case gradually released, replaced by a sustainable alertness that didn't drain them both dry. But normality was always temporary in their line of work. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, routing through official channels in a way that immediately signaled something significant. Captain Okonkwo's voice carried the same tension Sarah remembered from the night she first learned about the contract on her life. "Collins, we need you at headquarters, now." Sarah arrived to find the task force reassembled, faces she hadn't seen since the initial arrests gathered around the conference table, with expressions of grim determination. Reeves stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding attention. 6 hours ago, she began, Judge Henning was found dead in his cell. Apparent suicide. Sarah's stomach tightened. Henning had been cooperating, providing testimony that threatened to bring down additional members of the network. His death wasn't a coincidence. His suicide note named names, Reeves continued, but not the ones we expected. According to Henning, the network we dismantled was just a subsidiary. There's a larger organization, international in scope, that used Harrington's operation as a regional hub. She clicked to a new slide, displaying a map of global connections that dwarfed anything they had previously imagined. Lines connected Atlanta to London, Hong Kong, Sao Paulo, Dubai. Financial flows that moved billions through legitimate businesses while funding everything from political influence campaigns to criminal enterprises. Henning called them the consortium, Reeves said. We have fragments of intelligence that corroborate his claims. If he's right, the people we arrested were middle management at best. Sarah processed the implications. They had thought themselves victorious, but victory had been an illusion. The true enemy was still out there, still operating, still threatening everything they had worked to protect. "What's our next move?" she asked. Reeves turned to face her directly. "We're putting together a new task force. Federal resources, international partnerships, full commitment from every agency with a stake in this fight. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to be long, but it's the only way to finish what you started in that burning mansion." Sarah looked down at Max, who sat at her feet with the patient readiness she had come to depend on over their years together. He met her gaze, his brown eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond training or instinct. She thought of the briefcase, pulled from the flames by her partner's unyielding determination. She thought of Harrington, murdered by people who believed they were above consequences. She thought of Langston, whose betrayal still stung despite the justice that had been served. The consortium represented everything she had dedicated her life to fighting: corruption, impunity, the systematic abuse of power for personal gain. They were bigger, stronger, and better protected than any enemy she had faced before. But she had something they didn't. She had Max. "We're in," she said, "whatever it takes." Reeves nodded, unsurprised. "I was hoping you'd say that." The briefing continued, laying out the preliminary intelligence they had gathered on the consortium's structure and operations. Sarah absorbed the information, her mind already working through scenarios and strategies. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but uncertainty had never stopped her before. When the meeting ended, she walked Max out of headquarters into the late afternoon sun. The city spread before them, millions of people going about their lives, most of them unaware of the forces that sought to exploit and control them. Protecting those people was the job. It was the oath she had sworn and the mission she had chosen. Max pressed against her leg, a warm reassurance that she was not alone. New fight, she told him, bigger bad guys. His tail wagged, the simple gesture carrying all the enthusiasm and courage that had made him the finest partner she could imagine. Together they walked into the fading light, ready for whatever challenges awaited. The consortium didn't know it yet, but they had just made a powerful enemy, a lieutenant who didn't quit and a K-9 who never gave up. Atlanta's skyline burned gold and amber as the sun set behind the towers. Another day ending, another night beginning. The city breathed and pulsed with life, its secrets and sins hidden beneath the gleaming surface. Somewhere in that maze of streets and shadows, the enemy waited. Somewhere, plans were being made to protect the corrupt empire that had grown fat on stolen wealth and broken lives. But justice was coming. It had 4 legs and a badge. It had a nose that could find truth buried under layers of deception. It had a partner whose determination had never wavered, not once, in all the years they had served together. Sarah opened the door of her SUV, and Max jumped in without hesitation. She climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. The hunt was on. Months passed. The investigation into the consortium consumed every waking hour, a puzzle of global proportions that required coordination across time zones and jurisdictions. Sarah traveled more than she ever had, accompanying federal agents to meetings in Washington, New York, and eventually overseas as the scope of their inquiry expanded. Max traveled with her when regulations allowed, stayed with trusted colleagues when they didn't. Their bond remained unbreakable despite the separations, each reunion filled with the enthusiastic affection of a partnership forged in fire. The consortium proved to be everything Henning had claimed and more. a shadow organization with tentacles in every major financial center, its influence protected by layers of legitimate businesses and cooperative officials. Bringing it down would require years of work, the kind of sustained effort that burned out agents and destroyed personal lives. Sarah accepted the cost. She had known when she agreed to join the task force that normal life would become a distant memory. The work was too important to abandon for comfort or convenience. The break they needed came from an unexpected source. A consortium accountant, terrified of consequences he saw coming, reached out through intermediaries offering to cooperate. His name was Marcus Chen, and he had spent 20 years managing the financial architecture that allowed the organization to move money across borders without detection. Chen's defection was handled with extreme care. He was extracted from Hong Kong under diplomatic cover, transported to a secure facility in Virginia and debriefed by a team of analysts who worked around the clock to verify his claims. Sarah participated in the debriefings, her role to assess Chen's credibility through behavioral observation. Max sat beside her during the sessions, his reactions to Chen's emotional state providing insights that supplemented her own analysis. Chen was genuine. His fear was real, his regret apparently sincere. He provided access codes, account numbers, and communication protocols that opened windows into operations the task force had only glimpsed from the outside. The information Chen provided led to coordinated actions across 12 countries. Bank accounts were frozen, properties seized, operatives arrested. The consortium's leadership, accustomed to immunity, found themselves facing legal systems they had long believed were under their control. Not all of them survived to face trial. Some fled to countries beyond extradition's reach. Others met with accidents that suggested the organization was cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might provide testimony. A few turned on each other, former allies becoming enemies as the edifice of mutual protection collapsed. The final act played out in Atlanta, where the story had begun. The consortium's regional coordinator, a man named Victor Sloan, who had replaced the vacuum left by Harrington's death, attempted to flee the country through a private airfield outside the city. Sarah and Max were part of the team that intercepted him. The airfield was small, barely more than a runway, and a few hangars set among pine forests north of the perimeter. Sloan's jet was fueled and ready when the convoy of SUVs arrived, its engines already warming for departure. The arrest team deployed with practiced efficiency, surrounding the aircraft and blocking the runway. Sloan emerged from the hangar with 2 bodyguards, his face a mask of arrogance that cracked when he saw the force arrayed against him. "Victor Sloan," Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the tarmac. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. Put your hands where I can see them." For a moment, Sloan hesitated. His bodyguards tensed, hands moving toward weapons they would never reach. Then the arrogance returned, a smirk spreading across his features. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "The consortium is bigger than anything you can imagine. You've cut off a branch, but the tree will keep growing." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but today, you're coming with us." The bodyguards were subdued without violence, professional enough to recognize a losing situation. Sloan was cuffed and escorted to a waiting vehicle, his threats and protests fading into the background noise of a successful operation. Sarah watched him go, feeling the peculiar emptiness that followed the conclusion of a major case. Months of work, countless hours of sacrifice, all leading to this moment of anticlimax. Sloan in handcuffs, his empire crumbling, his future a series of courtrooms and prison cells. Max stood beside her, panting lightly in the Georgia heat. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from the familiar gesture. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." Max's tail wagged, his tongue lolling in what she had always interpreted as a smile. Around them, the arrest team secured the scene, gathering evidence, documenting everything for the trials that would follow. The legal process would take years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The consortium's grip on Atlanta had been broken. Reeves approached, her expression carrying the same exhausted satisfaction Sarah felt. Hell of a run, Collins, from a burning mansion to international conspiracy. Sarah nodded. Couldn't have done it without him. She indicated Max with a gesture. He's one of a kind. Reeves crouched to Max's level, offering her hand for him to sniff. The dog obliged, then accepted her scratch under the chin with dignified pleasure. You both are. They drove back to the city as sunset painted the sky. Atlanta sprawled before them, its towers catching the dying light, its streets filled with evening traffic. A city of millions going about their lives, most of them unaware of the battles fought in their name. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. A call in the night, a burning mansion, a dog who refused to abandon his mission. Such small moments in retrospect, yet they had changed everything. The consortium wasn't finished. Organizations that large and wealthy didn't disappear overnight. But the Atlanta hub was gone, its leadership imprisoned or scattered, its operations exposed to the scrutiny of law enforcement agencies around the world. It was enough. For now, it was enough. She pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the gathering darkness. Max waited patiently in the back seat, his breathing slow and steady. "Home," she said, opening her door. "At least for tonight." They walked up the stairs together, the familiar path worn smooth by years of repetition. Sarah unlocked her apartment, flicked on the lights, and let Max bound ahead to check the space as he always did. Everything was where she had left it. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the medals and commendations gathering dust on a shelf she rarely looked at. Evidence of a life lived between crises. She poured water for Max, fixed herself a drink, and settled onto the couch with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The television flickered to life, news anchors discussing the arrests with the breathless excitement of those who reported on events rather than living them. Max finished his water and padded over to join her, his weight settling against her legs with the familiarity of countless evenings spent exactly this way. She ran her hand along his back, feeling the play of muscles beneath his coat, the strong heartbeat that had never faltered in all their years together. The news moved on to other stories, weather, sports, the endless cycle of human drama that filled the airwaves. Sarah muted the volume, preferring the silence. Outside her window, Atlanta glittered with a million lights, a city that never truly slept, never fully revealed its secrets. She had dedicated her life to understanding those secrets, to protecting the innocent from those who would exploit them. The work would continue tomorrow. New cases, new criminals, new challenges to overcome. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest. Max's eyes drifted closed, his breathing deepening into sleep. Sarah watched him for a long moment, grateful beyond words for the partnership they shared. He had saved her life more times than she could count. He had found evidence that brought down empires. He had been her constant companion through darkness and light alike. She finished her drink, set the glass aside, and let her own eyes close. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, she was home. The night wrapped around them, silent and peaceful. Two partners resting after battle, ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a memorial wall at APD headquarters, her dress uniform crisp and pressed, Max sitting at attention beside her. The ceremony had concluded an hour ago, but she had lingered, reading the names of officers who had given their lives in service to the city. The Harrington case had cost lives, officers she had known, agents she had worked alongside. Their sacrifices had made the final victory possible, but victory always came at a price that statistics couldn't capture. Captain Okonkwo found her there, approaching with the quiet respect of someone who understood what she was feeling. "The Commissioner wants to see you," Okonkwo said. "Something about a commendation." Sarah shook her head. "I've got enough medals gathering dust. This one's different." Okonkwo's expression softened. "It's for Max." That got her attention. She looked down at her partner, who met her gaze with his usual calm intelligence. The ceremony was held in the Commissioner's office, a small gathering of people who had been part of the Harrington investigation from the beginning. Max received the Medal of Valor, the highest honor the department could bestow on a K-9 officer. Sarah accepted it on his behalf, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "He earned it," Commissioner Walsh said, shaking her hand. "Every bit of it." After the ceremony, Sarah took Max for a long walk through Piedmont Park. The spring had arrived in full force, azaleas blooming in explosions of pink and purple, the air warm and fragrant with new growth. The city felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of corruption that had pressed down on it for so long had finally begun to lift. They stopped at their usual bench by the lake, watching the water ripple under a gentle breeze. Max settled at her feet, his medal still pinned to his harness, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Torres. "Celebratory dinner tonight at Giovanni's. Whole team will be there." She smiled, typing her acceptance. The task force had become something like a family over the months of shared struggle. They had bled together, mourned together, and now they would celebrate together. But first, she had one more stop to make. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon, shadows lengthening across manicured lawns dotted with headstones and monuments. Sarah navigated the familiar paths until she reached a grave marked with a simple stone bearing the name of her former partner, Officer David Chen, killed in the line of duty 3 years before Max had joined the K-9 unit. She knelt beside the grave, Max lying down beside her in silent solidarity. "We got them, David," she said quietly. "The network you were investigating when they killed you. We finally got them." The wind stirred the leaves of a nearby oak, the sound almost like a whispered response. Sarah placed a small bouquet of flowers against the headstone and rose to her feet. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed into something else over the years. Motivation, purpose, a reminder of why the work mattered. Max pressed against her leg, offering comfort in the wordless way he had perfected. "Let's go," she said. "We've got a dinner to attend." Giovanni's was packed when they arrived, the entire task force having commandeered the private room in the back. Cheers erupted when Sarah and Max walked in, hands reaching to shake hers and pat the hero K-9's head. The evening blurred into a montage of toasts, stories, and laughter. Reeves recounted the moment they had cracked the consortium's communication codes. Torres described the look on D.A. Webb's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of their shared experience. Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The hypervigilance that had become second nature during the investigation gradually released its grip, allowing her to simply be present with people she had come to trust with her life. Max made the rounds, accepting treats and affection with the dignified grace of a celebrated warrior. He had earned every bit of adulation, and he seemed to know it. As the evening wound down, Reeves pulled Sarah aside. "I'm being transferred to Washington," Reeves said. "They want me to head up a new division focusing on international corruption, consortium-level threats. Congratulations," Sarah said, meaning it. "You've earned it." Reeves nodded. "I want you to consider joining me. We're building a team, the best of the best. Your experience would be invaluable." Sarah looked across the room to where Max was receiving belly rubs from Torres. The offer was tempting. The work Reeves described was exactly the kind of challenge she thrived on. But Atlanta was home. The K-9 unit was home. Max had given the best years of his life to this city, and he deserved to see out his career in familiar territory. "I appreciate it," Sarah said, "but my place is here, at least for now." Reeves smiled, unsurprised. "I figured you'd say that. The offer stands, whenever you're ready." They embraced, two warriors who had fought in the same trenches, their bond forged in fire and blood. The party continued until late, eventually spilling out onto the sidewalk as guests said their goodbyes. Sarah walked Max to her SUV, the night air cool and pleasant after the warmth of the restaurant. "Good night," she asked him. His tail wagged. Answer enough. They drove home through quiet streets, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Atlanta had its problems, would always have its problems, but tonight, at least, it felt a little safer. Sarah parked, walked Max up to the apartment, and settled into the familiar routine of evening feeding and unwinding. The television played softly in the background, news she didn't really watch. Her mind drifted to the future, more cases to solve, more criminals to catch. The work never really ended, but that was okay. That was the life she had chosen. Max finished his dinner and padded over to the couch, assuming his usual position against her legs. Sarah stroked his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. 7 years they had been partners, hundreds of cases, countless dangers faced and overcome. He was getting older now, the grey creeping into his muzzle, his movements slightly less explosive than they had been when they first started, but his heart was unchanged, his loyalty undiminished. She thought about the burning mansion, the moment he had refused to leave, the briefcase he had dragged from the flames. That single act of stubborn courage had changed everything, had brought down an empire, had saved lives that would have been destroyed if the corruption had been allowed to continue. "Good boy," she whispered. "Best boy." Max's tail thumped against the cushion, his eyes already drifting closed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases to work, new mysteries to solve, but tonight they rested. Partners, friends, family. The apartment settled into silence. The city breathing softly outside the windows, two figures on a couch, human and canine, sharing the peace they had earned. The medal gleamed on Max's harness, a symbol of everything they had accomplished together. But the real reward wasn't metal and ribbon. It was this moment, this connection, this bond that no amount of money or power could ever break. Sarah closed her eyes, letting exhaustion carry her towards sleep. Max shifted slightly, pressing closer, his warmth a constant reassurance. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. They always did. The weeks following the celebration settled into a comfortable routine. Sarah and Max returned to regular K-9 duties, working cases that ranged from drug interdiction to search and rescue. Each assignment carried its own challenges, its own rewards, but the shadow of the Harrington case lingered, not as a threat, but as a reminder of what they were capable of accomplishing when circumstances demanded their best. One morning in early May, Sarah received a visitor at the K-9 training facility, a woman in her 30s, well-dressed, with the careful composure of someone holding strong emotions in check. "Lieutenant Collins," the woman said, "I'm Elizabeth Harrington, Garrison's daughter." Sarah tensed, unsure what to expect. The Harrington name still carried weight in Atlanta, though much of that weight was now negative. "I know what my father did," Elizabeth continued. "The corruption, the bribes, all of it. I've spent the last 6 months going through his records, trying to understand how he became the man who died in that panic room." Sarah remained silent, letting the woman speak. "I found something." Elizabeth pulled a USB drive from her purse. More files. Things that weren't in the briefcase your dog recovered, names of people who were never arrested, operations that are still running. Why bring this to me? Sarah asked. Because you're the one who started this. You and Max. Elizabeth's voice wavered. My father was a monster, but he was still my father. I need to know that his crimes are fully exposed, that no one else is still benefiting from what he built. Sarah took the USB drive, weighing it in her palm. It was small, innocuous, but she knew from experience that such devices could contain evidence worth millions, information that could destroy lives or save them. I'll make sure the right people see this, Sarah said. Elizabeth nodded, tears finally breaking through her composure. Thank you. And please, tell your dog thank you too. If he hadn't found that briefcase, I would never have known the truth about my own family. After Elizabeth left, Sarah examined the USB drive with growing unease. The Harrington case was supposed to be closed, but closed cases had a way of reopening when new evidence emerged. She called Torres. I need you to look at something, she said. It might be nothing, but it might be everything. Torres arrived within the hour, his forensic equipment in tow. They worked through the files together, Sarah watching as documents and spreadsheets scrolled across the screen. The information was explosive. Elizabeth Harrington had uncovered a parallel operation that Garrison had kept separate from his main records. A network within the network, involving people whose names had never appeared in the original briefcase. Some of these people are still in office, Torres said, his voice hushed. Still making decisions, still wielding power. Sarah studied the names, recognizing several from news reports and public events. People who had expressed outrage at the corruption scandal, who had called for accountability and reform. People who, according to these documents, had been on Garrison Harrington's payroll all along. We need to take this to Reeves, Sarah said. To whatever's left of the federal task force. Agreed. Torres began copying files to a secure server, but Collins, this is going to open old wounds. People thought this was over. It's not over until everyone pays for what they did, Sarah said. That's the whole point. The renewed investigation proceeded with the same intensity as the original, though with less fanfare. The targets were more careful now, more paranoid, aware that the net could close at any moment. But careful people still made mistakes, and the evidence Elizabeth Harrington had provided gave investigators the leverage they needed to find those mistakes. Over the following months, 3 more arrests were made. A state representative who had blocked legislation that would have exposed the network's real estate fraud. A police union official who had protected corrupt officers from internal investigation. A banking executive who had facilitated the movement of dirty money through legitimate channels. Each arrest sent shockwaves through Atlanta's power structure. The message was clear. The cleanup wasn't finished. Those who thought they had escaped were living on borrowed time. Sarah and Max played supporting roles in most of these operations, their primary duties still focused on the K-9 unit's regular work. But when the final target was identified, Sarah received a personal request. The target was Alexander Morrison, a former federal prosecutor who had quietly resigned 6 months after the original arrests. He had retreated to a gated community outside Athens, living off accumulated wealth while his former colleagues faced justice. Morrison had been the network's legal architect, the mind behind the corporate structures and immunity deals that had protected corrupt officials for decades. Without his expertise, the empire Harrington built would have crumbled long before Sarah and Max stumbled onto that burning mansion. The arrest team assembled at dawn, a mix of federal agents and local officers, briefed on the sensitivity of the operation. Sarah and Max were assigned to the perimeter, tasked with preventing Morrison from escaping through the property's extensive grounds. The operation began smoothly. The main team breached the front entrance while Sarah and Max circled toward the rear. The property was large, several acres of manicured lawn and decorative gardens surrounding a house that looked more like a small hotel. Max's behavior changed as they approached the back garden. His head came up, ears swiveling, nose working the air. He had detected something. "What is it, boy?" Sarah murmured, scanning the environment for threats. Max pulled toward a garden shed, partially hidden by a row of cypress trees. Sarah followed, weapon drawn, senses heightened. The shed door was ajar. Through the gap, she could see movement, shadows shifting against the interior walls. "Police," she announced. "Come out with your hands visible." The door burst open, and Morrison emerged at a dead sprint, heading for a gap in the perimeter fence. He was fast for a man his age, driven by desperation, but Max was faster. The Belgian Malinois launched himself at the fleeing suspect, covering the distance in seconds. His jaws clamped onto Morrison's arm, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but firm enough to end any thought of further resistance. Morrison screamed, collapsed, and found himself face down on the grass, with Sarah's knee in his back and her cuffs clicking around his wrists. "Alexander Morrison," she said, slightly breathless, "you're under arrest." The arrest made national news, the final chapter in a saga that had captivated the country for over a year. Morrison was the last major figure in the Harrington network to face justice, his capture symbolizing the thoroughness of the cleanup. The trials proceeded over the following years, each one peeling back another layer of the corruption that had infected Atlanta's institutions. Some defendants pleaded guilty, seeking reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. Others fought to the end, their expensive lawyers exhausting every appeal before accepting the inevitable. Sarah testified at several trials, her account of the burning mansion and Max's discovery becoming part of the legal record. Each time she took the stand, she was reminded of how close they had come to losing everything. If Max had obeyed her command to retreat, if the fire had consumed that hidden compartment minutes earlier, none of this would have happened. The what-ifs haunted her sometimes, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. But mostly she focused on what had happened rather than what might have been. Max's career continued for another 2 years after Morrison's arrest. He remained at the top of his game, his instincts as sharp as ever, his partnership with Sarah the envy of the K-9 unit. They closed cases together, trained together, built on the legend they had created in that burning mansion. But time came for every officer, human and K-9 alike. On Max's 9th birthday, the department veterinarian delivered news Sarah had been dreading. Arthritis in his hips, early signs of heart disease. Max could continue limited duty for a while longer, but the days of chasing suspects and breaching buildings were behind him. Sarah took the news harder than she expected. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself intellectually for the reality of working dogs' shortened careers. But knowing and feeling were different things. The retirement ceremony was held on a sunny afternoon in October, the department turning out in force to honor one of their most decorated K-9 officers. Max received a certificate of service, a commemorative plaque, and a lifetime supply of his favorite treats. Sarah spoke briefly, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Max gave everything he had to this department, to this city. He saved lives, caught criminals, and made Atlanta safer by his service. He was more than a partner. He was family. After the ceremony, she took him home to the small house she had purchased specifically for his retirement. It had a fenced yard where he could roam, a comfortable bed by the fireplace, and plenty of room for the quiet life he had earned. The adjustment was difficult for both of them. Sarah continued working with a new K-9 partner, a young German shepherd named Atlas, who showed promise but lacked Max's intuitive brilliance. Max, for his part, struggled with the sudden absence of purpose that defined his existence. But gradually, they found a new rhythm. Sarah would come home from shifts to find Max waiting at the door, tail wagging with undiminished enthusiasm. They would walk together in the evenings, slower now, But no less meaningful, the bond they had forged in crisis proved strong enough to survive the transition to peace. The years passed. The Harrington case faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrages. Atlanta continued its endless cycle of growth and change, the corruption they had exposed becoming just another chapter in the city's complicated history. Sarah rose through the ranks, her experience with the task force opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. She became captain of the K-9 unit, then deputy chief of special operations. Each promotion brought new responsibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, but she never forgot where it had started. Never forgot the partner who had refused to leave that burning mansion, whose stubborn courage had changed everything. Max lived to the age of 13, a remarkable span for a working dog who had pushed his body so hard for so many years. He spent his final months surrounded by love, his days filled with gentle walks, comfortable naps, and all the treats his aging digestive system could handle. When the end came, Sarah was beside him, her hand on his head, her voice murmuring the words she had spoken countless times over their years together. "Good boy, best boy. I love you." Max closed his eyes, sighed once, and was still. Sarah buried him in the backyard of the house she had bought for his retirement, beneath a magnolia tree that bloomed every spring in explosions of white and pink. She placed a stone marker with his name, his years of service, and a simple inscription: he never gave up. Life continued, as it always does. Sarah's career flourished, her reputation as an incorruptible officer and brilliant investigator spreading beyond Atlanta to national recognition. She was offered positions in Washington, opportunities to join federal agencies, chances to shape policy at the highest levels. She declined them all. Atlanta was home. It always had been. On the 10th anniversary of the Harrington case, a journalist contacted her for a retrospective piece. She agreed to an interview, though she limited her comments to the facts of the investigation. The journalist asked the question everyone always asked. Looking back, do you think it was worth it? The years of work, the danger, the personal sacrifices? Sarah considered her answer carefully. The corruption we exposed had been destroying lives for decades. Innocent people sent to prison on false evidence. Guilty people walking free because they paid the right bribes. Communities decimated by crimes that were never investigated. She paused. Was it worth it to stop that? Yes, absolutely, without question. The journalist nodded, scribbling notes. And what about Max? What role did he play? Sarah smiled, the expression carrying both joy and sorrow. Max was the best partner I ever had, human or otherwise. He had instincts that I still don't fully understand, a courage that never wavered, and a loyalty that defined everything we accomplished together. She looked toward the window, toward the backyard where the magnolia tree stood. Without him, none of this would have happened. The briefcase would have burned with the mansion. The network would still be operating. He changed everything. The article ran the following week, featuring a photograph of Sarah in her deputy chief's uniform alongside an older image of Max in his working harness. The headline read, "The K-9 who brought down an empire." Sarah kept a copy of the article, tucking it into a scrapbook alongside the medal Max had received, photographs from their years together, and a collar worn thin from years of service. Some nights, when sleep wouldn't come, she would sit in the backyard beneath the magnolia tree and remember the burning mansion, the hidden briefcase, the partner who had refused to give up. Max had been gone for years now, his memory fading from the public consciousness. But for Sarah, he would never be forgotten. She had loved him, still loved him, always would. And somewhere she liked to believe he was still watching, still protecting, still the best boy, The magnolia's branches swayed in the night breeze, casting shadows that danced across the grass. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the peace that came from knowing she had made a difference. The city spread before her, Atlanta's lights glittering against the darkness, a city she had devoted her life to serving, a city that owed more than it knew to a Belgian Malinois who had refused to leave a burning mansion. Sarah rose, brushed the grass from her clothes, and went inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. But tonight, she remembered. And remembering was enough. The legacy of the Harrington case extended far beyond Atlanta. Other cities studied the investigation as a model for dismantling entrenched corruption networks. Law enforcement agencies around the world incorporated lessons learned from the task force's methods into their own training programs. The case became a staple of criminal justice curricula, analyzed and debated in classrooms from New York to London. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences and seminars, sharing her experiences with officers who faced similar challenges in their own jurisdictions. She always made sure to mention Max, to give credit to the partner whose instincts had made everything possible. At one such conference, held in Chicago 3 years after Max's death, a young K-9 officer approached her during a break. "Lieutenant Collins," he said nervously. "I mean, Chief Collins. I just wanted to say that your story inspired me to join the K-9 unit. My partner Rex and we try to live up to what you and Max accomplished." Sarah smiled, touched by the tribute. "What's the most important lesson you've learned working with Rex?" The young officer thought for a moment. "To trust him. Even when my own judgment says different. If Rex is telling me something, I listen." "That's exactly right," Sarah said. "That's the lesson Max taught me. Our partners see things we can't. They understand things we don't. When they tell you something is important, believe them." The young officer thanked her and returned to his seat, his expression carrying the determined enthusiasm of someone who had found their calling. Sarah watched him go, remembering when she had been that young, that eager, that certain of her path. The conference continued, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, thinking about all the young officers who would follow in her footsteps, who would form partnerships with K-9 officers and face dangers they couldn't yet imagine. Some would succeed, some would fail, but all of them would be part of a tradition that stretched back generations, the ancient bond between humans and dogs applied to the modern challenge of keeping cities safe. After the conference, Sarah visited the Chicago K-9 unit's training facility at the invitation of its commanding officer. She watched handlers work with their dogs, recognizing the same techniques she had used with Max, adapted and refined over years of practice. One dog in particular caught her attention, a Belgian Malinois, young and energetic, with the same intelligent eyes that had looked at her from Max's face so many years ago. The dog was struggling with a detection exercise, unable to locate the hidden target despite clear motivation. Sarah approached the handler, a woman in her 30s with the patient demeanor that K-9 work required. "Mind if I try something?" Sarah asked. The handler nodded, stepping back to observe. Sarah knelt beside the Malinois, letting the dog sniff her hand, establishing a connection. Then she spoke quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority she had developed over years of partnership. "Easy, boy. Take your time. You know what you're looking for. Trust yourself." The dog's ears perked up, something shifted in his posture, the anxiety of failure replaced by renewed focus. He began working the area again, more methodically this time, his nose close to the ground. 30 seconds later, he found the target. The handler's eyes widened. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything," Sarah said, rising to her feet. "He did. He just needed permission to trust his instincts instead of worrying about meeting our expectations." She spent another hour at the facility, observing training exercises and offering advice when asked. The experience reminded her of why she had dedicated her life to K-9 work, the unique satisfaction of watching human and K-9 partners learn to communicate across the species barrier. On the flight home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A burning mansion, a stubborn dog, a briefcase full of secrets. Such small moments in the grand scheme of things, yet they had rippled outward to touch lives she would never know. The plane descended through clouds toward Atlanta, the city emerging below like a glittering mosaic of lights and shadows. Home, the place where everything had begun. Sarah returned to her duties with renewed energy, throwing herself into the work of building the next generation of K-9 officers. She established a mentorship program, pairing experienced handlers with newcomers to pass on knowledge that couldn't be taught in classrooms. She advocated for increased funding, better equipment, and enhanced veterinary care for working dogs. She fought bureaucratic battles to ensure that K-9 units received the recognition and support they deserved. The work was demanding, often frustrating, but ultimately rewarding. Each success, no matter how small, represented a step toward a future where K-9 officers and their partners could serve more effectively. Atlas, her second K-9 partner, had long since retired and been replaced by a succession of dogs, each with their own personality and strengths. None had matched Max's intuitive brilliance, but each had contributed to cases that made Atlanta safer. Her current partner was a Dutch shepherd named Echo, a veteran of the unit with an impressive record of drug interdictions and suspect apprehensions. Echo lacked Max's legendary status, but she was dependable, loyal, and exceptionally skilled at her job. Working with Echo reminded Sarah that every partnership was unique. The bond between handler and K-9 couldn't be replicated or replaced, only renewed with each new pairing. Max would always hold a special place in her heart, but that didn't diminish the value of the relationships that followed. On a warm evening in September, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at headquarters. A man in his 60s, well-dressed, with the careful bearing of someone accustomed to wealth and influence. She didn't recognize him, but something about his expression suggested a weight he needed to share. "Chief Collins," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "My name is Robert Harrington. I was Garrison's brother." Sarah tensed. The Harrington name still triggered reflexive caution, memories of corruption and conspiracy that had nearly cost her life. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Robert continued quickly. "I'm here to apologize." Sarah gestured for him to sit, maintaining a professional distance while she assessed his intentions. For what, specifically? For everything. Robert's composure cracked, revealing grief long suppressed. "Garrison and I haven't spoken in years. We had a falling out over his business practices. I suspected what he was doing, but I never had proof, and I was too much of a coward to dig deeper." He pulled a folder from his briefcase, placing it on her desk. "These are records I've been compiling since his death. Not of his crimes. The authorities already have those, but of the people he helped before he became what he became. Scholarships he funded anonymously, medical bills he paid for employees' families, charitable donations that never made the papers." Sarah examined the documents with growing surprise. The picture they painted contradicted everything she knew about Garrison Harrington. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to understand that the monster you brought down wasn't always a monster." Robert's voice broke. "He was my big brother once. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, defended me against bullies. Somewhere along the way, he lost himself. The power, the money, the opportunities to cut corners and get away with it. He became someone I didn't recognize." Sarah set down the documents. "I'm sorry for your loss, but nothing in these papers changes what he did. I know." Robert nodded, accepting the truth. "I just wanted someone to know that there was more to him than the headlines showed, and I wanted to thank you, in a strange way, for stopping him before he could hurt more people, for giving my family a chance to make things right. After Robert left, Sarah sat alone in her office, processing the encounter. The human capacity for contradiction never ceased to amaze her. Garrison Harrington had built schools while destroying lives, funded medical care while facilitating corruption. He had been a monster and a philanthropist, a criminal and a brother. Perhaps that was the most important lesson of the case. Evil wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it wore expensive suits and donated to charities. Sometimes it had family members who loved it and mourned its loss. The challenge wasn't just identifying evil, but understanding it well enough to prevent others from following the same path. Sarah looked at the photograph of Max that sat on her desk, his noble profile captured in a moment of alert attention. He had understood evil intuitively, his nose able to detect what human senses missed. Trust your instincts, he had seemed to say. Trust what you know to be true. She filed Robert's documents in a secure drawer, not sure what to do with them, but unwilling to simply discard them. Maybe someday they would matter, maybe they already did. The years continued their steady march. Atlanta evolved, grew, changed in ways both predictable and surprising. New scandals emerged to capture public attention. New heroes rose to confront new challenges. The Harrington case receded further into history, mentioned occasionally in retrospectives and anniversary pieces, but no longer part of the city's daily consciousness. Sarah's career reached its natural conclusion on a spring morning 2 decades after a dog had refused to leave a burning mansion. She stood before the same memorial wall where she had lingered after the original arrests, now wearing the 4 stars of a police chief, the highest rank she could achieve. The retirement ceremony was elaborate, befitting a career that had transformed the department. Politicians spoke of her integrity, colleagues praised her leadership, and community leaders thanked her for decades of service. Sarah accepted the tributes gracefully, deflecting attention whenever possible to the officers and staff who had supported her throughout her tenure. In her final speech, she returned to the theme that had defined her life's work. Every accomplishment I've achieved, she said, every case I've closed, every corrupt official I've helped bring to justice, I owe to the partners who worked beside me. Human and K-9. Those relationships, built on trust and mutual respect, are the foundation of everything we do. She paused, her gaze finding the young K-9 officers in the audience. When I was your age, I had a partner named Max, a Belgian Malinois, who taught me more about courage, loyalty, and determination than any training program ever could. He died many years ago, but not a day goes by that I don't think about him, that I don't try to live up to the example he set. Her voice wavered slightly, decades of emotion breaking through her careful composure. Trust your partners. Listen to them. Learn from them. And when they tell you something is important, believe them. Because sometimes they see what we can't, they know what we don't. And if you're lucky, like I was, they'll change your life in ways you never expected. After the ceremony, Sarah drove to the house where Max was buried. The magnolia tree had grown tall over the years, its branches spreading wide to shade the garden where her partner rested. She sat beneath the tree as evening settled over Atlanta, the city's lights beginning to glitter in the gathering dusk. The same view she had watched countless times, yet it never lost its power to move her. "We did it, boy," she said softly. "Everything we set out to do. The corrupt officials are gone. The network is destroyed. Atlanta is safer because of what we accomplished together." The leaves rustled overhead, a sound that always made her think of Max's presence, still watching, still protecting. "I'm retired now. Can you believe it? All those years of chasing bad guys, and now I'm supposed to just, play golf?" She laughed. "You would have hated golf. All that sitting around, waiting for something to happen. She pulled out the medal Max had received, the one she had kept safe for 20 years. The metal was worn smooth from handling, the ribbon faded, but it still gleamed in the last light of sunset. "I kept this for you," she said. "Never felt right to leave it in a drawer somewhere. You earned it." She placed the medal against the base of the magnolia tree, propping it against the stone marker that bore his name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The night deepened around her. Stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them during countless operations, countless dangers, countless moments of triumph and fear. Sarah rose, brushed the grass from her clothes, and looked one last time at the grave of her partner. "Good boy," she said, "best boy." Then she walked inside, leaving the medal where it belonged, with the hero who had earned it. The door closed behind her, the night settling into peaceful silence. And somewhere, in whatever place loyal hearts go when their work is done, a Belgian Malinois lifted his head, ears perking at a familiar voice. His tail wagged once. Then he settled back down, content in the knowledge that his partner was safe, that their work had mattered, that the bond they had shared would never truly end. Some partnerships transcend time. Some loyalties never fade. Sarah and Max, partners forever. The magnolia tree stood sentinel over the garden, its branches reaching toward the stars. The medal gleamed silver in the moonlight, and Atlanta slept, safer than it had been before a dog refused to leave a burning mansion. The story of Sarah Collins and Max became legend in law enforcement circles. It was told and retold, passed down through generations of officers who drew inspiration from the partnership that had changed everything. Cadets at the police academy learned about the burning mansion, the hidden briefcase, the stubborn K-9 who had trusted his instincts when his handler ordered retreat. Museums preserved artifacts from the case. The original briefcase, scarred by fire and time, sat in a display case at the Atlanta Police Department's headquarters, accompanied by photographs and documents that told the story of corruption exposed and justice served. Visitors lingered before the exhibit, reading the plaques, studying the images of a woman and her dog who had made a difference. In the years that followed Sarah's retirement, new scandals emerged and new heroes rose to confront them. But the standard they set remained the benchmark against which all such efforts were measured. Had they trusted their partners? Had they followed their instincts? Had they refused to give up when the easy path was retreat? The magnolia tree in Sarah's backyard bloomed every spring, its white blossoms a reminder of the partner who rested beneath its roots. Each year, on the anniversary of Max's death, Sarah would sit beneath its branches and remember the years they had shared, the cases they had solved, the bond that had defined her life. She lived quietly in retirement, watching the city she had served for so long continue its endless evolution. New buildings rose where old ones had stood. New streets carried new names. But some things remained constant: the dedication of officers who protected and served, the loyalty of K-9 partners who gave everything for their handlers, the enduring truth that courage came in many forms, some of them with 4 legs and a wagging tail. End.